On March 3, 1913, protesters parted for the woman in white. Dressed in a flowing cape and sitting astride a white horse, the activist, Inez Milholland, was hard to miss. She was riding at the helm of the Women's Suffrage Parade, the first mass protest for a woman's right to vote on a national scale. After months of strategic planning and controversy, thousands of women gathered in Washington, D.C. Here, they called for a constitutional amendment granting them the right to vote. By 1913, women's rights activists had been campaigning for decades. As a disenfranchised group, women had no voice in the laws that affected their or anyone else's lives. However, they were struggling to secure broader support for political equality. They'd achieved no major victories since 1896, when Utah and Idaho enfranchised women. That brought the total number of states which recognized a woman's right to vote to 4. A new media-savvy spirit arrived in the form of Alice Paul. She was inspired by the British suffragettes, who went on hunger strikes and endured imprisonment in the early 1900s. Rather than conduct costly campaigns on a state-by-state basis, Paul sought the long-lasting impact of a constitutional amendment which would protect women's voting rights nationwide. As a member of the National American Women's Suffrage Association, Paul proposed a massive pageant to whip up support and rejuvenate the movement. Washington authorities initially rejected her plan and then tried to relegate the march to side streets. But Paul got those decisions overturned and confirmed a parade for the day before the presidential inauguration of Woodrow Wilson. This would maximize media coverage and grab the attention of the crowds who would be in town. However, in planning the parade, Paul mainly focused on appealing to white women from all backgrounds, including those who were racist. She actively discouraged African American activists and organizations from participating and stated that those who did so should march in the back. But Black women would not be made invisible in a national movement they helped shape. On the day of the march, B Wells Barnett, a groundbreaking investigative journalist and anti-lynching advocate, refused to move to the back and proudly marched under the Illinois banner. The co-founder of the NAACP, Mary Church Terrell, joined the parade with 22 founders of the Delta Sigma Theta sorority, an organization created by female students from Howard University. In these ways and more, Black women persevered despite deep hostility from white women in the movement, and at great political and physical risk. On the day of the parade, suffragists assembled to create a powerful exhibition. The surging sections of the procession included international suffragists, artists, performers, and business owners. Floats came in the form of golden chariots, an enormous Liberty Bell, and a map of enfranchised countries. On the steps of the Treasury Building, performers acted out the historical achievements of women to a live orchestra. The marchers carried on even as a mob blocked the route, hurling insults and spitting at women, tossing cigars, and physically assaulting participants. The police did not intervene, and in the end, over 100 women were hospitalized. Their mistreatment, widely reported throughout the country, catapulted the parade into the public eye and garnered suffragists greater sympathy. National newspapers lambasted the police, and congressional hearings investigated their actions during the parade. After the protest, the Women's Journal declared, "Washington has been disgraced. Equal suffrage has scored a great victory." In this way, the march initiated a surge of support for women's voting rights that endured in the coming years. Suffragists kept up steady pressure on their representatives, attended rallies, and petitioned the White House. Inez Milholland, the woman on the white horse, campaigned constantly throughout the United States, despite suffering from chronic health problems. She did not live to see her efforts come to fruition. In 1916, she collapsed while giving a suffrage speech and died soon after. According to popular reports, her last words were, "Mr. President, how long must women wait for liberty?" Though full voting inclusion would take decades, in 1920, Congress ratified the 19th Amendment, finally granting women the right to vote. When we make videos about the history of justice, we often wonder, what's next? Luckily for us, within our community, there is a chorus of young voices demanding a brighter future. Check out some of these ideas on the TED-Ed Student Talks YouTube channel, or visit ed.ted.com/studenttalks to learn more about the program.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Laguna Woods Democratic Club special meeting. For those of you who are having lunch at home, we thank you for supporting the Democratic Club. And for those of you who are just watching, we also thank you for tuning in. We are very fortunate today to have as our speaker, California State Controller Betty Yee. Betty Yee has been a friend of the club for many years. She has spoken to us many times. I can only refer to her as Betty. The last time that Betty spoke, she actually came directly from the airport from speaking at the UN climate conference. We are so pleased to have Betty speaking to us today. She will be speaking about the significance of the 100th anniversary of women's suffrage, of the 19th Amendment in the United States. And a huge honor and privilege to have as our speaker today, California State Controller Betty Yee. Thank you, Betty.
Thank you, Sue. Very wonderful to see you and to see all of you and friends old and new with the Laguna Woods Democratic Club. First of all, I am hopeful that all of you are staying healthy and safe during this time. And there's nothing more that I wish for but to be able to see all of you in person sometime soon when we get to the other side of this pandemic. But thank you for having me this evening. And you have a wonderful memory, Sue. I remember the last time that I was before the club. But we're here to actually acknowledge a very special time. But before I do that, I want to also just give recognition to just a lot of the experiences that many Californians and frankly Americans are undergoing right now. And I think it really will speak to the convergence of just the need for us to stay active and why this connects so much back to the women's suffrage movement. We've had this pandemic now affecting California. I know we're going into our 20th week of, really staying isolated, really being sure that certainly in terms of my 1,500 member staff team in the controller's office, we continue to do our work, practicing physical distancing, wearing masks. And yet we know that our job right now is so critical to so many in California. And I'm so proud of my team for not having missed a beat, being sure that we are still making payments to our vendors and paying our state workers and being sure that all of our local governments and school districts are getting their disbursements. And this is really a time when I hope there's a renewed appreciation for what the role of government is. And as I think about, this time, it's also a time of where so many people are suffering. There have been close to well over 6 million people, close to 7 million people who've applied for unemployment insurance benefits here in California. And this has been a pandemic-induced recession where we are seeing just how vulnerable our economy really has been all these years. That here in California, it's hard to believe that a third of our workforce here in California actually make $15 an hour or less. And that's hardly sustainable in terms of being able to afford to live in California and many of our communities in California. And but what we also need to be mindful of is that for many of those who are in that range of earnings, most are people from our communities of color. Many are women from those communities. And so as we look forward to how we're going to rebuild our economy, I think we really have to focus on the most vulnerable who have really held up our economy. This has been the foundation that's allowed the rest of the economy to perform. And so we're hopeful that when we start to talk about recovery, that we start to pay attention to just so many who now are on unemployment, but for whom their jobs may not be able to be in existence after this pandemic. And so we have a lot of work to do on that front. And then also what we've been seeing over this last period of weeks and months with respect to the civil unrest that we've been seeing across the country, and how so much of this has brought us back to our history. about what has happened with each of our different communities. That we have seen great strides in terms of rights and protections that have been hard fought and won and accorded to various communities, hopefully to benefit them. But what we have not seen are the economic gains that are that should be coming along with those rights and protections. And so we are seeing this huge movement, not just here in the United States, not just here in California, but around the world with respect to the ongoing fight for racial equity and justice. And so, I mentioned all this because the intersection of all of this really is the role of women. And the role of women in terms of women who are, with respect to representation in our government, women in terms of our leadership in our society, and all of the different disciplines that we now occupy throughout all of our society, about women in our economy and what it means in terms of when we rebuild, how we can be sure that there is gender equity, but also as we think about all of these issues that have now become so top of mind for particularly communities that are struggling, that we have to be very mindful of the intersection of all of these issues. We're not going to be solving them one at a time, but really the idea that, when we talk about so many of our low-wage workers, this is a women's issue. When we talk about how we're going to attain racial equity and justice, this is very much a women's issue with respect to women's representation, women's leadership, and also women who frankly are holding up the economy in many ways, not being compensated for the work that they do. And I'll talk a little bit more about that relative to the issues that we've been hearing about this week from Vice President Biden about his economic plan and the terrific plan that he put forth this week around the care economy, which has been predominantly occupied by women. So when we celebrate the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment, it brings up a lot of different feelings for me. And particularly during this time, I really feel like our work is not done yet. And certainly when we think about the suffragists and how so many who fought for this right weren't even able to enjoy it when it had been won. And how so many actually even died fighting for this right. And yet, after it was secured and the right for women to vote was guaranteed in our Constitution, we know that African-American women were not able to vote right away. And so, you look at this course of history, and it's always been, we win the rights, we win the protections, but it's not really been available for everybody. And I think as we look forward in terms of the work that we still have to do, there will be a lot of attention paid to the concept of inclusion, being sure that nobody is left behind as we're dealing with these policies to try to bring about equality and justice. That we think about what it means for particularly communities of color, which has been bearing a disproportionate impact with respect to not being able to climb the economic ladder or have the same opportunities. We think about geography and location and place, where so many people who live in remote areas or rural areas aren't able to access opportunities as well. But I like to think about this time also as really being a time of awakening, where we have so many communities that are going to be a part of this fight. And I think for many of us who have been through the women's movement, who have been through the civil rights movement, the Voting Rights Act, all of these different challenges that finally we felt like, we had scored a victory. We know that these struggles continue. And today we're facing, even with this 2020 election, the fact that voter suppression is alive and well. And how are we going to deal with that to be sure that we have integrity in our vote, and the fact that everyone who's eligible to vote does vote, can vote, and that their vote is counted. And so this is really an issue that doesn't go away, it seems like. And I know there's a saying that many like to give voice to, and that is for each generation is defined by a struggle. And I feel like in so many ways we are reliving so many of the struggles of the past. But I also understand it. It's a reckoning, if you will, that the fight wasn't really complete at the time that we won these rights. So I'm actually very excited because what's given me a lot of hope is the fact that so many young people are taking to the streets and really looking at being a part of how they can really build the future that they rightfully so deserve. That this is something that they know is not going to be just gifted to them, but that they're going to have to fight for this. And that whether it's about issues around the economy and their ability to find quality jobs or to be able to afford higher education, to be able to live in a place where with climate change is going to be safe and where they can still enjoy safe water and clean air and all of these things that really are so problematic now because we have not been the best stewards of all of the things that we hope to pass on to the next generation. So when we celebrate this anniversary, the 100th anniversary, I'm also mindful about just what it means in terms of women in leadership. And first, I just have to say, in Orange County, this is quite phenomenal. I mean, I don't think there's any other place in California, particularly when I lend my support to candidates, where there have been so many stellar women candidates. Orange County has been just a fantastic just place where you're not only just growing Democratic leadership, but really wonderful Democratic women's leadership. And I think this is where I always have called Orange County ground zero from the perspective that, this has been an area where you've had to do this on your own. And I know this particular club has been very much a part of the movement to turn the county blue. It has been very much a part of the movement to support our progressive candidates. And I'm just very hopeful because you have so many leaders now who really are not afraid to speak to the work that needs to be done. Even if it's not the most popular thing with with much of the electorate in Orange County. And we also know during this COVID-19 pandemic that there have been many differences of opinion about what needs to be done to get on the other side of this pandemic. And to see women leaders just really being the loudest voices about what needs to be done is just really a sign that I hope more will be in positions of leadership to chart the course for the future, that there will be more who will be occupying disciplines that will be informing these decisions of the future as well. And also, as we think about our young people, that there will be just so many more role models for them to be able to just aspire to and to hopefully create opportunities for them to see themselves in positions of leadership going forward as well. When I think about the vote, it is so sacred, and why was this so hard fought? People often ask me, it's we won the right to vote, and I think, and I always have to correct them. We fought for the right to vote. We didn't win much of anything. It was hard fought. As I said, we still haven't fully won it yet. But the right to vote is to me the most fundamental right that we could have attained, because without it, and I really consider the right to vote being the ability for us then to win and to be able to gain other rights. Without the ability to vote for the representatives who we want to really be our voice. Without having the ability to vote on issues that really affect our communities and our everyday lives. Without being able just to be a part of a democratic process where our fundamental voice is our vote, and then obviously our continued activism and engagement is going to be how we continue to make good policies that really do influence our lives. But the vote is the most fundamental of all rights, and so rightfully so, the suffragists did not give up. It took many decades before all of the states really came on board, and to be able to celebrate the 100th anniversary is really remarkable, and it really is a true testament to the recognition, the fortitude, and I think the foresight that women had about what this was going to mean in terms of their ability to gain their rightful place in society. And so, the courage that that took, I can't even begin to put myself in their shoes as far as, how to even have started a movement like this that wasn't the most popular, that became violent at times, and yet to now today, I hope that this isn't a moment that we take that for granted at all. That when we look at this fundamental right to vote, that we continue to ensure it for our communities of color, for our newer voters, for our immigrant communities, for our young people. And oftentimes I think when we talk about the right to vote, and I do hope there is high voter turnout this coming November. I mean, I can't imagine anybody could think about sitting this election out. But I oftentimes will remind people, if they even have any inkling of sitting this election out, just what it took, particularly for women, for our even to be able to have this right today. And oftentimes, more times than not, there are many young women who don't know the history of this. And so to be able to celebrate this year, to really begin to unveil the long history and the long journey, the long march to really gaining this right, and what it means today, if we actually have any thought about squandering it, I think is just really significant, particularly during this times when so much is at risk, not only because of the pandemic, but certainly with respect to our economy, with respect to so many people's livelihoods. And I'm just hopeful because, as I said earlier, the young people who have really taken to the streets, I think, have really started to take ownership of this time. And I welcome that. And I welcome the fact that it's not just young people, but a whole diverse array of different communities that have taken to the streets, that we're not going to tolerate the police violence that we've seen. That we're not going to tolerate communities being treated differently because of the color of their skin. That we're not going to tolerate the fact that so many communities are left behind, and that this has been really a time where we're recognizing the disparities so acutely because of this pandemic, because of this recession. And so I'm very hopeful. I'm really very hopeful. And, the work that I do as controller, I will say that, my job is obviously to have independent oversight of the state's finances. And here in California, we've been very, very fortunate to have wonderful leadership. We are getting more women elected to our state legislature. I will say that I'm honored to have the title of being the 10th woman ever to have been elected to statewide constitutional office, but it's also shameful at the same time that there only have been 10. So I don't intend to be the last, and so we are going to be working to get more statewide women elected here in California. But we have really, I think, a tremendous opportunity, particularly as we talk about how we're going to rebuild this economy. We've had a lot of lessons that we've learned from this pandemic, and one of which is we still have tremendous healthcare disparities here in California. And one of the things that I hope we can recognize is that, public health, which has been really, my background when I first started working professionally was in public health during the HIV/AIDS crisis. I was a county public health commissioner. And what I will say about public health is that it's really kind of the foundation of all healthcare when you think about it. It is when we look at chronic health conditions, it's when we look at food security, food safety, the safety of our water, the quality of the air that we breathe. So when you look at all of this, this is exactly what we're going to be faced with increasing impacts from climate change. And so I think as we talk about rebuilding the economy, it really has to be about how we build out our public health infrastructure, and particularly in those areas of the state that have been the most affected by this COVID-19 pandemic. It's about looking at bringing many of the public health disciplines into communities of color that have had the disproportionate impacts during this coronavirus public health crisis. It's about how we have education really elevate the ability to hopefully produce a new generation of public health professionals that will be at the front lines of what we're going to be facing next in terms of pandemics, in terms of climate change, in terms of the effects of pollution. But these are all the things that we're going to be facing as a state, and some of those impacts we're already feeling today as we're speaking. So but I am hopeful because just as much as we have seen the vulnerabilities, we know if there's the will, I do truly believe that we can address them. And what will be really important is going to be the voices of women. Because this is the one community that is the most diverse. We represent women of color, we represent older adult women, we represent young women, we represent women with disabilities. This is a community that really is intersectional in so many ways to be able to bring all of these issues to the forefront. And so I was very, very heartened by Vice President Biden's speech about the care economy that he gave this week, a recognition that, for so many Americans who are caring for loved ones, whether they're aging loved ones or loved ones with special needs, that we have so many of the caregivers are actually family members who are providing this care uncompensated. But really the tragic part of that is that, for any family member who's doing that, that family member is not participating fully in the economy. And so it has been a strain for so many Americans, and for him to give voice to that, to understand the toll that's taken, but to also elevate this issue to where it becomes actually part of our economic recovery is just really the vision that we need for this country. It suggests a really can-do attitude. It suggests that this work that has been done predominantly by women is one that has value, and that we should value it more, and that it is something that we should professionalize, something that we want to build out as being a sector of the economy that is about care continuum that starts with maybe even care for our young children all the way up to our older adult loved ones. And so I'm very, very hopeful about the attention that this particular sector is going to get, because so many Americans are facing these very real challenges around how do we provide care and at the same time still maintain a livelihood to be able to support the rest of our family. The other part of the economy that I'm very excited about too is the fact that so much of it is going to be focused on how we rebuild right here in our own communities. The fact that we have a lot of talent already, and so I particularly like the fact that when there are diverse workplaces, when companies that are doing business really value diversity, and I don't mean just gender diversity, but I mean also the ages of their employees, the particular communities and backgrounds that they come from, that this is really starting to add value to the company's bottom line. And I think for California, we've led really this movement in terms of representation among Fortune 500 companies, not just on their boards, but in their executive levels and also in their workforce. And so this is really about not leaving anyone behind. But I do want to applaud the efforts of some of my colleagues in the legislature who have really insisted that gendered corporate board diversity is something that we have seen studied time after time again, that does add to the bottom line of companies' performance. And so it's been really demonstrated over and over again, and we're going to see a lot more movement on this front. The idea that as we rebuild this economy, who's really at the helm of much of the economy and the companies that are trying to look at a future that will provide opportunities. And I think the more that we have women represented in those executive suites, the corporate board suites, and certainly the executive levels of companies, we're going to have a much fuller conversation about the kinds of needs that companies will need to pay attention to relative to their workforce, relative to how to provide for their employees, and more importantly, how to provide economic opportunities for just all communities so that none are left behind. And then I think what I want to say about this particular point in time too is, as we're celebrating this anniversary, is we had some pretty amazing women candidates who ran for president. And while we will not have a woman president this time, I think the fact that so many stepped up and stepped out, and and hopefully just normalize the idea that yes, a woman will be president someday soon, and that we really do bring a lot to the table. For so long, women candidates weren't really taken seriously, and yet we saw some very, very accomplished women who were seeking the presidency, and who really had track records, had perspectives, certainly represented a cross section of this country that I think really gave, at least for me, a sense that this is going to happen again, and hopefully we can get a woman elected soon. That they were right there in the debates, they were right there in the heartland of our country, they were traversing this country and going into very, very different communities. And what I really felt was something that got affirmed for me, when I work with women colleagues, is that we are so expansive in our thinking relative to how we solve problems. That it's not just looking at a particular issue in front of you, but that we're going to solve a problem to be sure that we are making society better. And I think we saw that with each of the women candidates, that certainly their track record, their ability to solve problems wasn't about just taking a position on something because they had to, but that there was really a lot of thought around policies that were going to be about how we were going to lift up communities, how we were going to provide for the next generation, how we were going to just look at being able to sustain livelihoods for many of our communities that really are undergoing tremendous economic change and transformation. So just so very proud of the women who stepped up to run and were able to give voice to that. So I think what I would just say during this anniversary is that, the fight is not over. And I know for many of us who've been part of this fight, that's not the most comforting thing to hear. On the other hand, I do think that we have more allies in this fight. Our young people, our ethnic communities, our communities of color, the idea that we are now looking at history with much more of a critical lens with respect to why we find ourselves still in some ways fighting the fights that we have been fighting. The idea that we thought we had won racial equity and justice with the Civil Rights Act, with the Voting Rights Act. And yet what we learned, and even with the Emancipation Proclamation, that what we learned was that, the economic gains that were supposed to come with that never took hold. And I think those are the lessons we're going to take with us, and particularly for women, because we have been at the end of really a lot of we have not attained gender parity in so many ways yet, but I think this has just elevated the need to be sure that when we fight for these policies going forward, that we will be inclusive, and that we will really fight to get the entire, just all the gains that come with it. And so I'm hopeful. And certainly with the activism of clubs like the Laguna Woods Democratic Club, so many of us who've been doing this for a long time, not letting up, being very open and welcoming of others to join the fight. This is what gives me hope. And so I'm just really proud to be just serving in this at this time when we have these challenges. I'm proud to be a Democrat. I am particularly ready to roll up my sleeves and to really be sure that we score a win this November with getting Vice President Biden elected, and come 2021, instead of having the Women's March, I hope that we're celebrating women who are newly appointed to a cabinet that will all collectively roll up their sleeves and really finish the job that we started through these movements. And to the women suffragists who really taught us about what fighting hard means, what tenacity means, why the vote is so sacred and worth fighting for. I don't know how we can really pay our due respect to them. This took a toll, and as I said, for many who were on the front lines, never even had the opportunity to enjoy the victory. So I think on those those women and the men who supported them, on those shoulders we continue to fight. And I just hope that as we celebrate this anniversary, we will not forget them. And more importantly, let's just do what we can to be sure that we don't repeat the mistakes of the past and are able to really fulfill the promise that comes with the rights and protections that we have fought so hard to win. So I think with that, I would be pleased to answer questions.
Betty, on behalf of Club President Linda Nearing, I just want to thank you so much for taking time to speak to us today and share your insights on this very important anniversary. And we thank you for your 35 years of public service. We have some questions from people who are on this Zoom call today, and I will call on them in order to ask those questions. And then our club vice president, second vice president, Rebecca Gilad, has some questions from people who submitted them earlier, if we get to those.
Sure.
Anyway, the first question is from Alan Feldman.
Hi.
Hi, Alan.
Thank you for speaking to us today. I guess it's an historical question. How you feel that the racism and the suffrage movement was infused with racism at first. The original leaders, they intentionally disassociated themselves from Black people. So how do you think that should be handled in this day and age? Not only the movement itself, but some of the leaders, people like Susan B. Anthony and so forth, great heroes. How do you think that should be addressed?
Yeah, I mean, I think really, Alan, it's a great question because, I've learned, during this time, I've been doing a lot of listening, a lot of reading, kind of almost relearning some of this history. And, what I would say is the first thing to do is that we have to acknowledge, what happened. There's no sugarcoating, the fact that, yes, there was this division between the white and Black community during the fight and the struggle. And in terms of how we address it going forward, I think for us, there's this whole, I will say, kind of discipline now of how we become anti-racist. And I think part of that is understanding what happened in the past that did constitute racism, how we look at really engaging with our diverse communities so that we understand how we can work together with them, and just being at every turn inclusive of their perspectives. And this will be difficult because oftentimes, there are some very strongly held views by, all parties in coming together on this. But I think what's important is that what you've just given voice to, we recognize that happened. And I think that's the first level. And when we look at, this whole idea of how we can become an ally to our communities of color, how we can become anti-racist, we have to do that work. We can't ask them to do that work for us. So we have to be sensitive. We have to really understand how to work with our communities of color, and also be mindful that their path to victory may look very different because they understand that frankly they fell short in the past. And so this is going to be a process that I think will be probably more painful in the beginning than not. But I would encourage all of us to just really stay committed to it. This is the fight that, frankly, we haven't allowed ourselves to be a part of. It's easy to feel separate and divided because that's been our history, but it's harder to figure out how to come together. But I love this question, Alan, because you just took the first step by acknowledging what had happened. And so now the next step is, how do we make it better? And I think as we look at the fights for racial equity, I will tell you, for me, even though I happen to be a woman of color, I will be fighting very, very strongly to lift the ban on affirmative action in the California Constitution. This is not establishing a quota, but it's really a recognition that we have had discriminatory policies that have affected our communities of color disproportionately.
Thank you, Betty. The next question is from Jean Lepowski.
Yeah, so my question is also related to racial disparities, and it has to do with people who are incarcerated. And
Yes.
what I want to know is, what do you see as the pros and cons of allowing incarcerated people to be able to vote?
Yeah, it's a great question. This will become actually, it will receive heightened attention. I know there's already quite a bit of discussion around the right to vote for those who are incarcerated. I think it's going to be part of the overall discussion around just the policies around criminal justice reform, the incarceration policies that we currently have, sentencing policy. I know that I've been involved in part of that discussion. I'm actually sponsoring a bill. I serve on the Victims Compensation Board, and we are sponsoring a bill that allow victims of police aggression to be able to claim compensation. And so it is a bill that does have bipartisan support, but I think in terms of the overall aspect of what happens to particularly communities of color and people of color in the prison system, this is going to be controversial. I mean, I will just say it outright. There are many who believe that because they have committed crimes, no matter how serious, how hard the offense was, that they have to do their time, which means that they have to sacrifice certain rights. I think if we actually start to have more of a focus on our inmates and those who are incarcerated, more of a focus on rehabilitation, knowing that at some point they are going to become incorporated into our communities and in our society, that that is something that we should recognize, and that they probably should be given a voice in terms of the right to vote. And I'll just share a story. I've been working with someone whose sentence was commuted by Governor Newsom, someone who was in prison, actually two inmates whose sentences were commuted by the governor, and both have been released. And they, both while they were incarcerated, really did so much to withstand the pressure of gangs while in prison. They were both in prison for, one was in prison for a very serious offense, for actually shooting someone in a botched home robbery. His friend, who just happened to be on the scene, was also sentenced to the same amount of time, but never had a gun, never pulled the trigger. And so, but because of what they both did while they were in prison, they decided they didn't want a life behind bars. And so both of them have master's degrees. They've been training in conflict resolution. They have been training inmates to become drug and rehab counselors when they are released. And so now that they are released, they are continuing that work. I mean, I look at these two gentlemen and I think, why shouldn't they have the ability to vote? And they probably should have while they were in prison, because they were very much about wanting to become productive members of our society, very much saw opportunities that they on their own could create for others in terms of having a livelihood. And so, but this will be wrapped up in the larger conversation about criminal justice reform. And while it will be controversial, I think we're going to see probably some interesting outcomes to grant these new rights for inmates.
Thank you, Betty. The next question is from Rebecca Gilad.
Ms. Yee, thank you for being here. I would like to ask you, for these 3.5 past years, every day that something new happens from the White House,
Yes.
I go, who's gonna stop that? But my hope was always, okay, in 2020 when we vote, that will change everything. Now 2020 is here and the vote is almost here. So my question is, how can we ensure that the vote will be counted, that it will be legal, that the Senate won't say whatever Trump wants, Trump gets? So what can actually be done?
You know, for me, I will say that we already know what we need to do, and that is we have to turn out the vote in ways that nobody, as I said, nobody should be sitting out this election. I mean, I want us to deliver such a decisive victory that even whatever level of protest this president or his allies in the Senate or anywhere else, whatever fight they put up, isn't even a fight. And I think part of this was what we have to do is, and I've heard so much of this, and I can't even believe I'm hearing this, but there are still many who really are on the fence about whether to vote or not. Because they aren't necessarily impassioned by, Vice President Biden, which is really hard to believe given the choice that we have. But it's also about the fact that, we have many communities that have been so excluded from this democratic process. And I think this is really the work of the Democratic Party. Now, how do we bring young people in? How do we bring our communities of color in? Because it's not so much that they're going to vote for the other candidates, they just won't show up. And we have to have this victory be so decisive in terms of people showing up and voting Democratic to where any kind of challenge to this election is not going to even see the light of day. And I would venture to guess that he is going to put up a challenge. I mean, this is someone who will just create a controversy, and he will probably take this to the hilt. And frankly, right now, it's an issue that is giving him a lot of airtime and a lot of play with his own supporters and base of supporters. But, remember, at the end of the day, I don't believe that his base of support has actually grown. In fact, it's probably really declined a bit because of just some of the policies you've talked about, Rebecca, that have been coming out of the White House over the last, since he's been elected. And so I think our job is really to be sure that not only are we getting everyone out to vote, but that after we actually have Vice President Biden elected, that people don't disappear, that this is the time that we are ready to support our president, to hopefully reverse some of the policies that have been put into place by this administration. And that as we started out this program, the idea that voting is just that first step in terms of exercising all our other rights. And so we have to be sure that our communities stay engaged, and again, particularly our young people, because this is the fight for them.
Thank you, Betty.
Thank you.
The next question is from Deborah David.
Hi, thanks, Betty, for being here.
Of course.
There are major disparities, as we know, in educational opportunities. And I'd like to know, what are your thoughts about how we can reduce those disparities?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. We have a lot of work to do there. The thing that I have been working on, and it's been really identified through this pandemic, that we don't even know what education is going to look like come this fall, and many schools will be opening the latter part of August. And I'm particularly focused on our K through 12 schools, where when the pandemic hit, there were so many school districts that were ill-prepared to continue instruction, and online instruction for many districts and for many students just was not possible. The idea that LA Unified School District lost contact with tens of thousands of students, when the pandemic hit, that's just unacceptable. And so what I've been working on is looking at how we can ensure that we have every student has an electronic device where they can receive their instruction, how we can be sure that our internet service providers are continuing to do their part, that there is really a moral obligation for them to provide service, particularly to our young people, because certainly our broadband capacity wasn't meant to be able to serve 6 million children at the same time, during the day online. And so they have to be a part of the solution as well. But this is really, I've been very, very focused on this whole issue of the digital divide, because, without being able to learn remotely, and some school districts may be able to employ a hybrid model of where students get instruction on site certain days of the week, they learn online at home, from home, or a remote location at other times. But the digital equity issue, to me, Deborah, has become so front and center. And we're not just talking about rural, remote areas. We're talking about highly concentrated urban areas as well. South Los Angeles, some of our communities that have spotty reception here, even in Northern California, the San Francisco Bay Area, definitely the remote areas in our rural communities. But when you think about what that means, it's not just education. Digital equity also relates to healthcare. It relates to access relates to information about jobs. It relates to public safety emergency notices. So I've been very, very focused on looking at how we can build out that infrastructure. But as far as school is concerned, I think our more immediate focus right now is making sure our students stay safe, but that they have access to instruction in whatever way is going to be provided.
Thank you, Betty.
Thank you.
Next, we have a question from Joel Goldstein.
Betty, thank you for being here. I'm wondering what the cost to the state has been from the shutdown to state revenue and how that affects the services the state has to provide.
Right. No, thank you for that question. So revenues have been depressed for sure. You know, the governor, when the pandemic hit in March, we actually pushed out the income tax filing and payment date from April 15th to July 15th to provide everyone with some relief so they wouldn't have to be experiencing stress and getting their taxes in right after the pandemic hit. And what the governor and the legislature just did and are in the process of continuing to finish and wrap up is essentially enact a budget to solve to a $53 billion deficit. And that really reflects a decline in income tax revenue, certainly in sales tax revenue, as well as corporation taxes. And but it also reflects increase in costs with respect to direct COVID-19 costs. So we are seeing much of the revenue depressed, and we expect that that will continue. Our tax revenues likely will be, particularly the sales and use tax with many of our businesses shuttered. We likely will see that particular tax source quite depressed. Income tax revenue, interestingly enough, we are seeing, we actually had some growth in the projection, from the projection in June, actually May, I'm sorry, because we saw many of the upper income earners were still continuing to do well. And so they were paying taxes, and we actually got quite a bit of tax revenue above the projections. But what we are not seeing are the low wage service sector workers, those who have lost their jobs. So in some ways it's affirming what we know about what's happening with this economy, the disparity that the upper income earners are doing well and those who are at the bottom of the earnings scale are not doing well. So a big part of what we're gonna, that will really dictate what revenues look like going forward is how soon we can get this economy fully running again. And I think this has been the challenge for our governor and for many of our local elected officials. The slow opening and then people letting down their guard and cases rising. Yes, some of it from additional increased testing, but a lot of it was just people letting down their guard from Memorial Day on to today. And so this is within our hands to really determine how quickly we can reopen this economy. And so that's really the question, is how long that will take. But even once it's open, we're going to see many businesses really continue to struggle. And so we're predicting that this is going to last probably the better part of the next 3 to 4 years, where we're going to have this depressed situation.
Thank you, Betty. We have some questions from people who are not on the call. And one of them is, how much is currently in California's rainy day fund and what will be done to replenish it after the pandemic? That really ties into the last question.
Yeah, so we had actually quite a bit in the rainy day fund. So when the pandemic hit, both former Governor Jerry Brown and Governor Newsom had continued to fill the rainy day fund, and most of the proceeds that went into the budget stabilization account were income tax revenues that were derived from capital gains and other investment related income. And the idea there, when the voters decided to put the rainy day fund in place, was to not program those dollars for ongoing spending. And so there was actually about $16 billion in that fund. And then there were other reserve funds as part of the rainy day fund in that account. There were other funds that made up the rainy day fund, including a education reserve fund that has several $billion in it, and then a health and social services safety net fund, a reserve fund that has just under $1 billion in it. Both the education and the social services safety net reserves have been drawn from significantly to balance this budget for this next fiscal year. The budget stabilization account, there is a limitation that we can only spend 50% that account, but it will continue to be replenished as new tax revenue comes in. So there is still money to spend there. And the legislature did give the governor, the governor declared a budget emergency right as he was, right before he signed the budget for the next fiscal year, which then will allow him to be able to tap into some of that rainy day fund, and the legislature gave him additional authority to do so. So, if we didn't have those reserves, we would not have been able to manage really saving programs for some of our most vulnerable Californians. Many of our senior programs were on the chopping block. The funding for those were restored. Education funding, we pretty much almost fully funded education. There are some cuts there. There's some deferral of payments to school districts, but much of that is tied to a trigger of receiving additional federal funds. State employees all are taking around a 10% salary reduction. So all of these things will be restored if we get additional federal funds by the middle of October. And that's really the next lobbying that we'll be doing, is with our congressional members in Washington to be sure that states and local governments continue to receive assistance from the federal government.
Okay, thank you very much, Betty. And I have a sort of fun question. We have time maybe for 2 more questions, and then maybe Rebecca can ask another question. And the question is, who do you think that Joe Biden will pick as his running mate for vice president?
I would not want to be in his shoes.
Yes. Who would you like to see?
I have, I would not like to be in his shoes. He has some really stellar candidates, and for different reasons. I'll just give kind of a quick assessment of some of them. I don't know Representative Demings at all from Florida, except for her, just some of what we saw during the hearings in Congress. But Karen Bass, obviously we've known as our Assembly Speaker here in California, someone who's really able to work across the aisle. And so I think that's attractive to the Vice President. Obviously our US Senator Kamala Harris, very accomplished as well. And Elizabeth Warren. I will say this, I have a particular passion for Elizabeth Warren from the perspective that, everything that I touch and the work that I do is really related to the economy. And I think, for many of the proposals that Vice President Biden articulated this week relative to the economy, she would be a good partner to try to, get those off the ground and to really begin to bring other economic policies to bear for our country. But I don't know what her chances are of being selected. I think Senator Harris, certainly her voice, important voice now for police reform, for looking at just some of the issues that she's been giving voice to more recently around the plight of renters and those who are, really kind of at the edge economically and financially right now is critically important. The fact that we should be focusing, domestically on just what Americans are experiencing right now is very critical. And then you have young, what I think are shining stars, like the mayor of Atlanta, Keisha Lance Bottoms, who has been just such a steady hand with respect to what's been happening in that city. And imagine, her governor actually suing her, with respect to her policies on how to keep her city safe and healthy is just beyond. But so I think it's really a bank of really rich candidates. I don't think we can go wrong with either, because frankly, I think Vice President Biden is really someone who's experienced. I have confidence in him. He's been through adversity, personal, professionally, that I think really has made him the strong leader that we need for this time. And more importantly, he's aspirational. Every time I hear him speak, he's just has belief in people of, from all backgrounds, and believes that we can rebuild this country better. And I believe that as well. We have tremendous talent. We have lots of opportunities we can create. And I think his aspirations, his compassion is really what's going to be a draw for people that we've been so sorely missing over the last 3.5 years.
Okay, I think we have time for Rebecca Gilad to ask one more question. Thank you, Betty. We'll see if you were correct in any of your.
Well, I didn't really pick one, but I would
you
say
didn't really pick. You didn't
no,
really pick.
no, but you know,
Okay.
yeah, it's a great rich position to be in for Vice President Biden.
One of the questions from someone who's not here is, what are the plans for developing more affordable housing?
Wonderful question. Thank you. You know, there are a lot of plans. I will say that we actually have historic resources to devote to affordable housing. And there are a couple of hurdles that really are getting in our way of from doing that. One, believe it or not, although I don't think that's going to continue to be the case, we actually, prior to the pandemic, had a labor shortage in terms of people we needed to be our builders. And so, but I think perhaps with this pandemic that likely will change. We have historic resources, like I said, being directed towards affordable housing, not only in terms of our state general fund, which got pulled back a little bit, but not by much. We have new bond dollars for affordable housing. We have an increase in our tax credits that are that incentivizes developers to build affordable housing. So this is really the time to get working on that. And so I sit on the tax credit allocation committee. We're currently undergoing a regulation process to look at how we can really get the most units built and in a way that really provides California with the broadest public benefit. And by that, I mean really being able to meet the needs of the different array of needs for housing, affordable housing. We have workforce housing, we have housing in different geographic locations. Certainly the issues of housing for people in transition from homelessness to shelter. So all of this is getting heightened attention because obviously with the pandemic, when we asked people to shelter in place, many people did not have enough housing security to be able to do that on a long-term basis. And so we are, I think, going to be in a position of really doing a lot. But where we really need some help is local government cooperation. We have not had the levels of housing construction permits approved for decades now. This is why we're behind in terms of the numbers of units. And so you're going to see a lot of housing plans being put forth by different local jurisdictions. I think many of them are actually overly optimistic if they could even get some of that accomplished, and also look at perhaps even rezoning or zoning reforms that can really be helpful to us as well. So we're ready at the state level, and we're going to try to streamline the effort to reduce costs for developers. We'll do our part, but we really want developers and local governments to take the state resources, match them, make them stretch, and really help us provide the broadest public benefit as much as possible.
Thank you, Betty. I think we have maybe 2 more minutes. If you could just give us a quick overview of the ballot initiative that will be on the ballot in November about changing the commercial requirements, the commercial for Prop 13. I'm trying not to say Prop 13, but for getting us some more taxes.
Sure. And just for the record, I have not taken a position, and usually I don't because my office is oftentimes asked to audit some of these measures, and so, but I'm happy to explain them. So this is Proposition 15 on the ballot, and it is a way to essentially what many would characterize as closing a loophole in terms of how commercial and industrial property is assessed as compared to residential property. And the idea here is that residential property has actually had enough churning in terms of sales and new ownership to where they've been reassessed to market value pretty frequently. And whereas commercial industrial property doesn't change hands in that way at all. And so this particular measure would essentially reassess commercial property. And it would give the county assessors several years to ease into getting all of those properties fully reassessed. And then they would be kind of essentially on the same cycle in terms of being subject to the inflation factor every year, taking on part of the debt service, local debt service that right now is the burden of residential property. So any kind of bond that's issued is usually like an additional rate increase for residential property owners. So we actually just had a hearing about this today at the Board of Equalization, and there are a couple of things that are coming out. The way the ballot initiative was written is going to present some implementation hurdles. It has the assessors really having to hire quite a bit of staff to be able to do all the reassessments. They have to be qualified appraisers. They have to be certified by the Board of Equalization. And so we know that that will take some time. We also know that we likely will be seeing an increase in the amount of appeals by commercial and industrial property owners because they will probably disagree with the value, the reassessed value, and then appeal that. So there'll be an appeals workload for counties as well. But what I will say is that the range of revenue that has been estimated to bring in between $6 billion and about $12 billion. The reason it's range is that we don't know really what's going to be happening with commercial property going on in the future. I sit on the board of CalPERS and CalSTRS, the retirement teachers retirement system and the public employees retirement system. And for the last several years now, we have seen really a move with commercial office buildings such that many companies are looking at using technology more. Their workers are working remotely. Certainly with this pandemic, we're seeing many companies that are going to be asking their workers not to come into their offices. And so we are going to see a lot of vacancies with respect to that office space. But we also know that these buildings also have been not just commercial office buildings, but when we talk about commercial property, we have small businesses that actually are lessees of much of these properties as well. So what came out during the hearing today was a little bit of discord from small business owners. And as you know, during this pandemic, minority small business owners have been hit hard. And so many felt that this was bad timing in terms of putting this on the ballot now. This would be an extra burden that would be passed down to them, and that the small business exemption in the proposition isn't necessarily going to affect them very much. But I think overall, I mean, this is about more money for schools, more money for local governments, more money for local services. I think it's been polling okay, probably not as robustly as the proponents would like. But we'll see. I mean, I was actually surprised that the last school bond that was on the ballot earlier this year was actually failed at the ballot. And so I don't know whether voters' sense of economic insecurity is going to have any effect in terms of how they'll vote on this measure. But certainly it's meant to put in dollars in the coffers of local governments and schools, and also close this loophole that has been really in place since the beginning of I will say at Prop 13 in terms of how commercial industrial property are assessed.
Betty, thank you so much. On behalf of Club President Linda Nearing, I just want to thank you, Betty Yee, California State Controller, for being here with us today.
Thank you.
We thank you for your amazing experience and expertise, and we wish you best of luck for the rest of your term and for whatever else you're going to do after that. We would like to see you maybe as governor. Anyway, we'll see what happens. You never know what's going to happen.
That's right. Well, let me just say thank you to all of you, and thank you to Laguna Woods Democratic Club for always being so thoughtful, informed, and more importantly, for your sustained activism. So appreciated.
Well, we thank you, Betty. And for those of you who are watching from home, please stay tuned, because you will be hearing from Katie Porter, and you will be hearing from Kati Petrie Norris and from Dave Mann, our three candidates, Democratic candidates running for office. They are going to each have a 5-minute video on included in this program. And so please stay on until the end. The program will run approximately an hour and a half. And thank you to our members who joined us today. And again, thank you to Betty and to her husband, Stephen, for arranging this meeting for us. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Sue, and thank you to the Laguna Woods Democratic Club for having me today. Of course, I wish we were doing this in person, but I'm so glad to join you and celebrate the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment and women's suffrage. In 2018, I was so proud to be part of a record-breaking number of women running for Congress and winning. We saw a lot of successes in 2018, but women still only make up 24% of Congress. While we have come so far in the past 100 years, and I am so grateful to the countless women and men who have sacrificed to get us here, there is still so much work to be done. There are millions of single moms in this country raising young kids, and I'm the only one in Congress. We need more women of color, and we need more younger women. We're gonna have to keep fighting to get the diversity of women in Congress that reflects the diversity of women in America. And I'm proud to stand shoulder to shoulder with you in making this a reality.
Good evening, Laguna Woods. This is Assemblymember Kade Petrie-Norris. It is an absolute pleasure to be here with you tonight. When I first got to know the Laguna Woods Democratic Club, I was a first-time candidate running against a Republican incumbent in a district that had been a long-time Republican stronghold. The odds were stacked against us, but together we won. And in 2018, we won big all across Orange County. Together, we changed the face of Orange County politics in a real, meaningful, and lasting way. Fast forward to today, a year and a half later, we are confronting a moment of unprecedented crisis, a pandemic-induced recession, and a reckoning on race and bias all across America. I never would have conceived that I'd be serving in a time like this, but I didn't run for office because I wanted to attend events with the Chamber of Commerce or pose for Instagram photo ops. I ran for office to serve this community and to serve my constituents. And never has that need been more urgent and more profound. For the past several months, my number one priority, California's number one priority, has been COVID-19 response. Our state has taken extraordinary steps to combat this virus. We know that our statewide stay-at-home orders have saved lives. We also know that it has been a tremendous sacrifice for workers, for small businesses, and for families all across our state. People are hurting right now. Since March, we've had more than 6 million Californians file for unemployment. We, like our country, are officially in a pandemic-induced recession, and California is grappling with a $54 billion budget deficit. In the face of these profound challenges, we've been able to enact a budget for the upcoming fiscal year that lives up to California's values, that keeps our promises to California kids, California seniors, and ensures that we do not make deep and devastating cuts to critical social services. We have a long road ahead, and a lot of this fight is still ahead of us. As we set California on a path to recovery, I am proud to be serving as part of the Assembly's Economic Recovery Working Group. And my priorities include ensuring that we're making smart investments in California's small businesses, in infrastructure, including green infrastructure, in education, ensuring that as we navigate through this pandemic and emerge from the other side, California's values aren't just intact, but California is stronger than ever before. My opponent, on the other hand, is not taking the threat of COVID-19 seriously. She has continued to diminish the threat of this unprecedented global pandemic. She has criticized Governor Newsom's response, calling him a dictator. She rushed to open Orange County businesses before it was safe and without necessary public health precautions. And shamefully, she continues, even today, even this week, she continues to host in-person campaign fundraisers. You may have seen earlier this week in the Orange County Register, there was an article about a fundraiser on a yacht hosted by the Orange County GOP with my opponent as one of the honored featured guests. The Orange County Register reported that masking was optional, social distance protocols were not observed. It is this kind of selfless, thoughtless behavior that is sabotaging our response to this pandemic, that is putting all of us at risk, and is frankly creating an even deeper hole for our economy. This is straight out of the Trump playbook. As we all know, this is the most important election of our lifetimes. November 2020, the most important election of our lifetimes. Donald Trump is on the ballot. It's not just him that's on the ballot. It's not just my opponent who's on the ballot. Decency is on the ballot. The heart and soul of America is on the ballot in November. And I am, once again, I am confident, like we did in 2018, in 2020, that we are going to win big. And I think it's particularly important to reflect on this upcoming election in the context of the centennial of women's suffrage. For so many of us, the 2016 election was a horrible, horrible wake-up call. We went to bed thinking, we woke up that morning thinking we were going to elect our first woman president. We went to bed that horrible night realizing we'd elected an unrepentant misogynist instead. But if there's a silver lining in the very dark cloud of the Trump election, it is the way that it has galvanized so many women across this country, across this state, and across Orange County to stand up as activists, to stand up as organizers, to stand up as candidates. And together, we are running, we are winning, and women, we are serving in historic numbers. So I know that I stand here as your assemblywoman on the shoulders of generations of activists who have come before me, on the shoulders of those very first suffragettes at Seneca Falls who fought for all of us to have a voice, for all of us to have a vote. In 2020, I know we are going to use that vote well. And in 2020, I know we are going to win big.
Hello, Laguna Woods. My name is Dave Mann. I'm a law professor at UC Irvine, a father of 3 young children, and I am running to represent you in the California State Senate. I hope you're all doing well during this time of COVID-19, that your health is good, that you are mentally strong despite the obvious difficulties of being in isolation. I'm always so blown away when I come to visit Laguna Woods Village. You all are in your golden years and you could be and maybe should be enjoying life. And yet so many of you are focused and dedicated and passionate about trying to make our community stronger, trying to make our state and our country a better place to live in. And it's really that commitment to the public good, to helping others, that I find so inspiring. And I cannot wait until we are safely able to get together in person again and I can see your faces. But for now, this will have to do on Zoom and our computers. Now, those of you who know me know that I've also spent my career working in the public interest, whether it's my time as a Wall Street prosecutor, trying to make our economy work more fairly, whether it's my time as a policy advisor in the United States Senate, trying to keep people in their homes during the subprime mortgage crisis, to try to get our economy back on track, or whether it's my time today as a UC Irvine law professor where I train the next generation of advocates and I focus my research on ways that we can get our economy working for working people again. I've spent my career trying to make our world a better place. And that commitment to the public good really comes from my parents. My parents are immigrants from Korea. They grew up during the Korean War and its aftermath at a time when Korea was devastated from its Korean War. Food was scarce. Korea was truly a third world country, and they grew up, idealizing America and what this country stands for. They worked hard. They came here in 1971 on a government program. They stayed here. They got their H-1B visas, and they were naturalized in 1981. Along the way, they had me and my brother. My brother's a doctor. I'm a law professor. In every way, our story is the embodiment of the American dream. And what's truly remarkable about our country is that my story is not at all unique. It's your story. It's everybody's story. That somewhere along the way in all of our family trees, someone or someones made that decision to come here, to leave their home country, to come to America, to forge a new life because of what this country has always stood for, the American dream, the opportunity, the egalitarianism that this country has always offered. And yet I fear we're getting off track right now. Too many people today no longer believe that the American dream exists. They believe that our country's on the wrong track. They believe that we're facing a bleak and dismal future. And I think they're probably right unless we change course. Donald Trump was not elected out of a vacuum. He was elected because too many people think that we are on the wrong track as a country. Now, as someone who spent a lot of time thinking about economic issues, there's a saying from the Greeks that really speaks to me. A civilization is great when its elders plant trees whose shade they know they'll never sit in. That commitment to paying it forward and investing in the future is what really made our country great. And yet we have gotten away from that. We need to start thinking about the next generation again. We need to invest in our infrastructure, in education, in fighting long-term challenges like climate change. But I am confident that when my kids are my age, we'll all be sitting around together, sitting with my grandkids hopefully, and talking about what a crazy time this is, this time that you and I are living through right now with COVID-19, with a president who issues proclamations by tweets, with so much that's happening. 2020 is the craziest year I have ever lived through, and I hope it will always be the craziest year that any of us have lived through. And I can imagine having that conversation with my grandkids at some point, but only if California leads the way. Those of us who study history know that Congress has almost always followed the successful lead of the states. It was true of large parts of the New Deal, things like the Interstate Highway Act. Most recently, Obamacare was based on a successful Massachusetts program. If we're going to get back on track, the states are going to have to lead, and California, as the 5th largest economy in the world, is going to have to be the leader in this regard. We have to forge our pathway ahead. I hope to be in the state senate representing you. Thank you so much for your support. If you want to learn more about me, you can read my website, daveminn.com, and appreciate your engagement. Take care.
I am standing on the shoulders of the ones who came before me. I am stronger for their courage. I am wiser for their words. I am lifted by their longing for a fair and brighter future. I am grateful for their vision, for their toiling on this earth. We are standing on the shoulders of the ones who came before us. They are saints and they are humans. They are angels, they are friends. We can see beyond the struggles and the troubles and the challenge when we know that by our efforts things will be better in the end. They lift me higher than ones who came before me. I am honored by their passion for our liberty. I will stand a little taller, I will work a little longer, and my shoulders will be there to hold the ones who follow me. They lift me higher than I could ever fly, carrying my burdens away. I imagine our world if they hadn't tried. We wouldn't be so very blessed today. I am standing on the shoulders of the ones who came before me. I am honored by their passion for our liberty. I will stand a little taller, I will work a little longer, and my shoulders will be there to hold the ones who